The sun was dipping low over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and crimson, when the rancher, a solitary figure with a wide-brimmed hat and weathered hands, rode slowly along the dusty path that led to the far end of his property. The wind was sharp and carried the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. He had been alone on this ranch for many years, ever since his family had passed, leaving him with nothing but the land and a herd of stubborn cattle that required his constant attention. He was accustomed to the isolation, finding a certain peace in the silence, in the rhythm of chores and the quiet presence of nature. Yet today, something felt different, a subtle tension in the air that made his horse skittish and his own skin prickle with unease. He turned the corner of the ridge and caught sight of something that made him halt instantly, his horse snorting in alarm. There, against the fading light, was a young girl, barely more than a child, hanging from a crude rope tied to a low branch of an old oak tree. Her small frame swayed slightly in the wind, and her eyes, wide with terror and defiance, locked onto his. Around her neck was a sign, crudely written in charcoal, reading, "White men don't forgive." The letters were jagged, uneven, but each one carried a weight of pain and fury that seemed to pierce the twilight air. The rancher dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the dusty ground, and approached cautiously. His hands instinctively hovered near the lariat at his side, though he had no intention of harming the girl. He could see that she was not yet unconscious, that her struggle was fueled by both fear and a desperate will to survive. Her clothing was tattered, dirt-stained, and the wounds on her arms and legs suggested a life on the run, a life spent evading people who wished her harm. Yet there was something more in her eyes, something that went beyond fear, a raw, unyielding strength, the kind of strength that had kept her alive in the harshest of circumstances. "Easy, child," the rancher said, his voice low, calm, and steady, as if speaking loudly might shatter her resolve or provoke her into further panic. He moved slowly, ensuring that each step was deliberate, showing her that he meant no harm. His own heart pounded in his chest, not with fear of what she might do, but with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. How had she ended up here? Who had left her hanging like this, a message written in charcoal for the world to see? The girl's lips trembled, but no sound came out. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to summon words, and then, with a forceful jerk, she shook her head violently, sending her hair flying in tangled strands across her face. Her gaze never left his, and in that look, he saw the unspoken warning: she was dangerous in her own way, not through malice, but through a refusal to be broken. "I won't hurt you," he said again, softer this time, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes on the same level. "I just want to help." Her reaction was immediate. She spat in the dirt near his boots, a small but pointed act of defiance. Her body tensed as though ready to spring, her fingers gripping the rope with white-knuckled determination. He noted the bruises along her jaw and the raw patches of skin on her hands, and something in his chest tightened. It was not just the sight of cruelty done to her, it was the recognition of injustice, the way life had forced this young girl into a corner with no allies, no protection. He took a deep breath and spoke again, careful with every word. "I'm not like them. I'm not here to punish you or to take anything from you. Yeah, broken bar, I just want you down from that tree." Her gaze flickered to the horizon, then back at him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the faint cries of cattle and the distant bark of coyote. He could feel the tension between them like a tangible force, a fragile wire stretched tight, ready to snap with the slightest provocation. Slowly, he reached up, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "If you trust me," he said quietly, "you won't fall. I'll catch you." She didn't respond, didn't nod. Instead, she kicked her legs slightly, testing him, testing whether he would flinch or hesitate. but he didn't. He kept his eyes on hers, steady and unwavering, and the girl, sensing perhaps that he was different from anyone else she had encountered, hesitated. Then, with the sudden courage that took him by surprise, she jerked the rope, testing him again, and allowed herself to lower slowly into his arms. When she hit the ground, she landed hard, rolling onto the dusty earth, and sprang up immediately, fists clenched and chest heaving. He let her go, stepping back, giving her space. She glared at him, defiance still etched into every line of her small frame, and he saw the bruised swell of tears forming in her eyes. She was furious, frightened, and yet alive, and that was enough for him, for now. "You're free," he said simply, his voice almost a whisper. "You're safe now." She laughed bitterly, a harsh, hollow sound that carried both mockery and despair. "Safe?" she spat. "You don't understand. White men don't forgive. They never forgive." He nodded slowly. "Maybe some don't. But I'm not here to forgive or condemn. I'm just a broken bar here. If you want help, you can take it. If not a broken bar." He trailed off, letting the words hang in the air, giving her the choice without pressuring her. Her chest heaved as she fought to control herself. She looked at him, sizing him up, measuring whether his calm demeanor masked hidden danger. Finally, she sank to the ground, knees drawn to her chest, and buried her face in her arms. The tension drained from her body in a way that was almost imperceptible, like the slow release of a tightly wound spring. The rancher didn't rush her. He crouched a few feet away, keeping his hands visible and his posture relaxed. He knew that trust was fragile, especially for someone who had been hunted, betrayed, and abandoned. Time would be the only way to earn it. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice muffled but steady. "Why broken bar? Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." He shrugged, as if the answer were simple. "Because no one deserves to be left like that. I've been alone a long time, but I haven't a broken bar lost everything. Not yet." He paused, searching for the right words. "And maybe because I know what it's like to need someone and have no one there." She tilted her head, listening, her eyes narrowing slightly. For a child who had lived on the streets, for a girl whose life had been one of constant danger, this was a foreign kind of conversation. No one had ever spoken to her without expectation, without threat, without the promise of harm hidden behind words. The notion that someone could act simply out of compassion was almost incomprehensible. "Do you always ride out here alone?" she asked finally, her voice small, almost vulnerable. He smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "Every day. This land a broken bar, it's all I have. But it's enough." Her gaze drifted over the sprawling fields, the rugged hills, and the fading light that bathed the ranch in a warm glow. She said nothing, only breathed in the air, feeling the space, the freedom, something she had not felt in a long, long time. The rancher noticed her tense posture slowly begin to relax. He knew it would be a long road before she trusted anyone again. She had been taught to fight, to mistrust, to survive alone. Yet even in that brief encounter, a seed had been planted, a faint glimmer that maybe, just maybe, there were people who could be trusted, people who could offer kindness without strings attached. "Come on," he said gently, standing up and dusting the dirt from his pants. "You can't stay out here all night. There's a cabin nearby. I'll get you some water, maybe some food. You'll be safe there." She shook her head violently. "Number. I don't need a broken bar. I don't need anything from anyone. Not from a white man, not from anyone. He studied her, realizing the weight of her words. She had lived her entire life under the shadow of danger and betrayal, and the memory of each injury, each act of cruelty, was etched deep into her bones. For her, accepting help wasn't just difficult, it was unthinkable. "I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "Just a broken bar. Let me help you. You don't have to trust me yet. Just a broken bar. Let me make sure you're okay." Finally, after a long silence, she allowed herself a small nod. Not a sign of trust, not a surrender, but merely an acknowledgement that she was willing to accept help on her own terms. That was enough for him. He led her slowly down the path toward his cabin, the sky now deepening into the purples and blues of twilight. The ranch seemed quiet, yet alive, every sound amplified by the stillness. Crickets chirped, a distant owl called, and the wind rustled the leaves above them. The girl walked carefully, her gaze never leaving his, measuring, analyzing, still unsure but moving forward nonetheless. Inside the cabin, the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs filled the air. He guided her to a chair near the hearth, and she sank into it as though it were a refuge, her small body folding in on itself. He brought a cup of water and placed it before her. She hesitated, then drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "You'll need to rest soon," he said, his voice gentle. "It's been a long day for both of us." She swallowed, nodded faintly, and remained silent. For now, words were unnecessary. The presence of someone who didn't seek to harm her was enough. As the night deepened, he sat nearby, not pressing, not intruding, simply present. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of another day. Inside, a fragile connection had begun, an unspoken understanding that perhaps, even in a world that seemed bent on cruelty, there could be moments of mercy, of kindness, of hope. And in that quiet cabin, with the shadows of firelight dancing across the walls, the young Apache girl began, for the first time in a long while, to imagine the possibility that not all white men were enemies, that not all people sought to harm her, and that perhaps, just perhaps, she could survive uneven. The night had settled over the ranch like a velvet cloak, the sky deep and infinite, studded with cold, unblinking stars. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows that danced along the rough wooden walls. The young Apache girl remained seated near the hearth, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes reflecting both the firelight and the lingering tension of the day's horrors. She did not speak, did not move except to sip slowly from the cup of water the rancher had brought her. He watched quietly, leaning back in his chair, understanding that trust could not be forced, only earned, one small gesture at a time. He could feel her wariness radiating from her, a kind of defensive vigilance honed through years of danger and betrayal. Every slight movement she made was measured, every glance calculated. He knew she had lived in a world where every hand could conceal a weapon, every smile could hide cruelty. Yet, despite her caution, she had accepted his presence, had allowed herself to be led from the tree to this cabin. That alone was a small victory, a crack in the walls she had built around herself. "I know you're scared," he said softly, breaking the silence. "I can't imagine what you've been through, but I can promise you this, you're not alone anymore. Not here." She flinched slightly at his words, as if the notion itself was foreign and dangerous. Her dark eyes, wide and wary, met his briefly before darting to the shadows in the corner of the room. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why help me? You don't know me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and met her gaze steadily. "I don't need to know you to know that no one deserves to be treated like that. Hanging from a tree with a broken bar, that's cruelty beyond reason. And if I can do something, anything to stop that, then I will." She studied him for a long moment, the muscles in her jaw tensing as she fought against the impulse to react with mistrust or anger. Her life had taught her that words could be traps, that promises were often lies. Yet there was something in his eyes, something calm, unyielding, and genuine that made her hesitate. Finally, she allowed herself to speak again. "Alia broken bar, they were after me. The men who left me 3 broken bar, they said I had something that belonged to them. That if I didn't give it up, the broken bar." Her voice broke, and she shook her head violently, refusing to finish the thought. He nodded slowly, not pressing, but acknowledging her fear. "I understand," he said quietly. "Whatever it is, whatever they wanted, you don't have to face it alone anymore." She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "I don't a broken bar, I don't know how to be around people anymore. Yeah, broken bar, a fight. That's all I know." "That's fine," he said gently. "You can fight if you need to. But here, with me, you won't have to fight unless it's for your own safety. I'll keep you safe." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if analyzing his words for hidden meaning. "Safe?" she repeated bitterly. "Safia broken bar, that's a joke. You don't know what safe is." "No one does." "Not really." "I know enough," he replied calmly. "I know enough to know that tonight, right now, you're safe. And tomorrow, I'll do everything I can to make sure you are again." She said nothing for a long time, just stared into the fire, her mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, disbelief, and a faint, reluctant flicker of hope. The firelight danced across her bruised and dirt-streaked face, highlighting the small cuts along her arms and the swelling near her temples. He could see that she had been through hell, yet there was a spark in her, a resilience that had carried her this far. "Yeah, broken bar, I don't trust easily," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Not anyone. Not ever." He nodded. "I understand. And you don't have to." "Not yet. Trust takes time. You just have to allow yourself to accept help for now." She frowned, as though weighing the words, then slowly nodded, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. It was not an acceptance of trust, but it was a tiny step toward the realization that she did not have to face the world completely alone. The rancher stood and moved to the small kitchen area, returning with a loaf of bread and some dried meat he had prepared earlier. "Eat," he said simply, placing the food on a small wooden table near her. "You need strength. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." She looked at the food warily, then at him, and finally, hunger overcame hesitation. She picked up a piece of bread and ate slowly, her movements careful, as if afraid that any sudden action might trigger another danger. He watched quietly, not forcing her, letting her eat at her own pace. Hours passed. The fire burned low, and the cabin grew quieter, the world outside cloaked in the deep silence of night. The girl's eyes grew heavy, her body relaxing slightly as exhaustion began to overtake adrenaline and fear. The rancher kept a chair nearby, silent and watchful, ready to intervene if needed but allowing her the space to rest. Eventually, she leaned back against the wall, her head tilted slightly, and let herself drift into a fitful sleep. He studied her for a long moment, noting the tension in her body slowly ease. Even in sleep, she was alert, her muscles coiled with the instinct to survive. It would take time for that instinct to relax fully, but the first step had been taken. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the horizon, bathing the ranch in pale gold light. The wind carried the scent of dew-soaked earth and blooming sagebrush. The girl woke first, cautiously, eyes scanning the room as if expecting an ambush. The rancher was already up, tending to the fire and preparing a small breakfast of eggs and bacon. She watched him silently for a while before speaking. "You really weren't lying," she said softly. "You a broken bar, you didn't try to hurt me." "I didn't," he replied simply. "And I won't. Not unless someone else tries." Her gaze softened slightly, just enough for a flicker of trust to appear. "Yeah, broken bar, I didn't think anyone like you existed." "Maybe there aren't many," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "But that doesn't mean none exist." They ate in silence, the quiet companionship a tentative bridge between two worlds, his of solitude and hers of survival. When the meal was finished, the rancher stood and offered her a hand. "Come on. I'll show you around. There's work to do if you want to help, and I can teach you some things that might make it easier to stay safe." She hesitated, her pride and mistrust warring with the faint curiosity that had begun to bloom. Finally, with a slow nod, she took his hand and followed him outside. The morning sun felt warm against her skin, and for the first time in a long while, she breathed in without the edge of panic. He led her across the ranch, showing her the fences, the barns, the cattle grazing in the fields. He explained the routines, the importance of knowing the land, and the ways to read the wind, the sky, and the behavior of animals to anticipate danger. She listened, asking questions now and then, her sharp mind absorbing details quickly. He could see her skills, honed by a life on the run, beginning to blend with his knowledge of the land. By midday, she had begun to relax slightly, moving with more confidence as she helped him repair a section of fence and tended to a few of the weaker cattle. Her movements were precise, efficient, and deliberate, a reflection of years of survival instinct. He watched her work, impressed by her skill and resilience, and felt a cautious hope that perhaps, together, they could create a measure of safety and stability for her. But he knew better than to assume that peace would last. The men who had left her hanging were still out there, and the memory of her past was never far from her mind. He could see the way her eyes darted to the horizon now and then, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers brushed against the knife she kept tucked at her waist. She was always prepared, always ready. And he understood that any threat, real or imagined, could reignite fear in an instant. That evening, as the sun sank low once more, he found her sitting on the porch, gazing out at the distant hills. He sat beside her quietly, giving her the space she seemed to crave. "They'll come back," she said finally, her voice low and tense. "I know they will. And if they don't, broken bar, I don't know if I can." "You will," he interrupted gently. "And if they come, we'll face them together. You're not alone anymore." She looked at him, eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time allowed herself a small, fragile smile. It was not trust yet, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall, a sign that the bond between them was growing, fragile as it might be. The night deepened, the stars appearing like scattered diamonds across the sky. In the quiet of the ranch, with the wind whispering through the trees, a young Apache girl began to understand that perhaps, even in a world that had been cruel and unyielding, there could be moments of safety, of hope, of human kindness. And the lonely rancher, who had lived so long in solitude, found a sense of purpose he had not felt in years, protecting, guiding,